Under the dim glow of a flickering street lamp, a little girl lay curled up on the cold pavement, clutching a worn-out stuffed bunny as the rain soaked through her tiny frame. She was bruised, exhausted, and invisible to the world rushing by. But then, fate placed her in the path of a man who had everything: wealth, power, influence. A man who believed he was untouchable, unshakable, and far too busy for feelings. Yet in that single heartbeat, when his eyes met hers, everything changed. What began as an ordinary night for a millionaire CEO became the beginning of a story that would rewrite his life forever. This isn't just about money or power. It's about humanity, about choosing to see someone the world had chosen to ignore. Stay with us, and if stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories. Beneath the glow of a rain-soaked Chicago night, the city seemed both alive and asleep, humming faintly like a restless dream. Water streamed down the glass walls of Thorn Tower, Jacob Thorne's empire, a monument to the man who had built everything with ruthless precision and iron will. The hour was late, the streets half empty, the kind of night where silence pressed close between the distant sounds of tires hissing over wet pavement. Jacob stood under the grand awning, his driver waiting with the car door open, his assistant murmuring tomorrow's agenda through the rhythm of falling rain. He should have stepped forward, slid into the leather seat, and disappeared into another night of deals and dominance. That was the script. That was who he was supposed to be. But something made him stop. Just beyond the curb, under the fractured glow of a flickering street lamp, there was a small shape. At first he thought it was a forgotten bundle, a heap of fabric left behind by someone who had vanished into the shadows. But then it moved. He squinted through the rain, the world narrowing down to that one fragile figure. A child. A girl. She was curled into herself like she was trying to vanish from the world, her thin coat soaked through, hair matted, face smudged with grime. One shoe missing, the other barely hanging on. In her arms she held tight to a stuffed bunny, its fur worn down and limp from too many nights of comfort. Jacob's polished shoes splashed against the puddles as he stepped closer, his assistant falling silent behind him. Kneeling, he lowered himself into the bitter cold of the street, the icy water seeping through the fabric of his trousers. The little girl's chest rose and fell faintly, shallow breaths but steady. Relief passed through him, though it was tangled with something heavier, something that squeezed in his chest. When her eyes fluttered open, he expected fear. Instead, what he saw hollowed him out. There was no fear, only resignation. Her lips parted, and in a whisper that almost vanished under the rain, she said, "Please don't take me back. I won't scream this time." For a man who had weathered boardrooms and funerals without blinking, who had stared down rivals with icy calm, those words pierced him in a way he could not name. She looked at him like she had already given up, like she had stopped expecting the world to care. He felt her weight even before he touched her, so slight in body, yet somehow heavier than everything he had ever built. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hands. She hesitated, then reached for him with a desperation that twisted his heart. Her tiny fingers clutched his coat as if clinging to life itself. When he lifted her into his arms, she felt almost weightless, her soaked clothes pressing cold against his tailored suit. Behind him, his assistant whispered, "Should I call child services?" He shook his head, voice low but steady. "No, cancel the car." She protested, mumbling about ruined shoes and appointments, but Jacob had already turned away. With the girl in his arms, he began to walk. Each step felt like stepping out of the life he had so carefully constructed. The city around him blurred, taxis sliding past, neon signs flickering in the distance, the sharp smell of wet concrete. All that mattered was the fragile warmth against his chest and the way her head slowly nestled against his shoulder. He had never held a child before. He did not know the right words, the right movements. Yet somehow his body knew enough. To shield her from the wind, to hold her securely but gently, to whisper soft assurances he never thought himself capable of. By the time he reached the lobby of his penthouse, she was already asleep, her breath softer, now calmer. He paused, staring up at the tower that once filled him with pride. Tonight its glass walls looked hollow, meaningless. The marble floors, the polished chrome, the curated art pieces waiting upstairs, all of it felt sterile compared to the quiet trust of a child sleeping in his arms. In the elevator, he caught sight of himself in the mirrored wall. The reflection startled him. For years he had known exactly who he was, ruthless, unshakable, defined by numbers and power. But tonight, with a child pressed against him, he saw someone else. Someone unfamiliar, and for the first time, he wondered if that was not such a bad thing. Inside the penthouse, silence pressed down like it always did, but it no longer felt like luxury. It felt like emptiness. He carried her into the guest room, laid her carefully on the bed, and wrapped her in blankets. She curled around the bunny instantly, as if afraid it might vanish. Jacob stood there longer than he meant to, watching her chest rise and fall, listening to the faint sound of rain against the glass. He had no children, no family, no softness left in his world. Yet here in this fragile little body, he felt something shift, something warm and terrifying and undeniable. As dawn broke, sunlight crawled across the floor. He found himself sitting in the kitchen, staring at a hospital bracelet he had discovered tucked in her soaked coat. The letters smeared, but one name stood out: Ella. He whispered it aloud, letting the syllables linger. It felt right, even if it was just a fragment of her story. When he looked back into the living room, she was still asleep, the morning light softening her bruises. He whispered again, Ella, and for the first time in years his voice trembled. The morning light inside the penthouse looked different than it ever had before. Once, it had been a trophy of success, spilling across marble floors and reflecting in the sharp edges of glass and steel, a space Jacob had curated like a showroom. Now, as he glanced toward the couch where Ella lay curled under a blanket, it felt intrusive, like sunlight revealing how empty his world had always been. She had not stirred much since he carried her in, only clutching her worn bunny closer, her body trembling occasionally as if fighting through unseen nightmares. Jacob loosened his tie, opened the fridge, and stared at rows of bottled water, neatly arranged like soldiers. He twisted one open but paused, remembering how her lips had been cracked, how he had coaxed warm tea between them just hours earlier. When her coat had fallen away, a bent hospital bracelet had slipped onto the floor. The ink was faint, but one word remained: Ella. He held it in his palm, staring at the letters, wondering if it was her true name or just another scrap from a life far too heavy for a child to carry. When she shifted on the couch, he crouched down, his voice quiet. Are you hungry? She curled tighter into the blanket, not looking at him. He tried again, softer. I can make you something, pancakes, cereal. Her whisper was almost inaudible. I don't want to get her in trouble. Jacob's chest tightened. Who? But she buried her face deeper and would not answer. Her small shoulders shook and the silence between them weighed like stone. He sat cross-legged on the cold floor, something he had not done since college. The words came slowly, uncertainly. You are safe here. No one will get in trouble for taking care of you. For a long time she said nothing. Then in a voice that cut straight through him, she whispered, Mommy said to hide if he gets mad. She did not hide fast enough. The air left his lungs. He stared out the tall windows, the city below orderly and indifferent, while memories he thought buried came back uninvited. The bell. The slammed doors. His mother's voice telling him to stay quiet. He stood abruptly, retreating into his office, fingers hovering over the phone. He thought of Carol Tanner, the attorney who worked closely with child services. Calling her would have been logical, efficient, safe. He could hand Ella over, let the system handle her, let his life remain untouched. Yet the thought rang hollow. She was not a transaction. She was not a line item on a ledger. She was a child, bruised and broken, and she was here because he had picked her up, because she had clung to him. He set the phone down with a sharp exhale. When he returned, she was awake, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were dark, haunting, filled with an age no child should ever carry. He asked gently, Do you want to tell me your name? She shook her head. He nodded. That's all right. We will wait. He placed a small plate of toast and sliced apples on the table, but did not push her to eat. Instead, he moved into the kitchen, keeping himself busy with meaningless motions, giving her the space to breathe. By noon, she was asleep again, curled against the couch pillow with her bunny tucked under her chin. Jacob watched her from the hallway, arms folded. For years, he had filled his life with things that mattered only on paper: profits, deals, accolades. But watching this child sleep, her small body dwarfed by the couch, he felt a guilt so heavy it rooted him to the floor. Later, when she stirred, her voice cut into the quiet. "Mom says rich people only care when someone is watching." He froze. "Do you believe that?" She shrugged, her voice flat. "I don't know, you are still here." The silence stretched long, but it was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, fragile and heavy. That night when he tucked her into the guest bed, she whispered, "Thank you." He asked gently, "For what?" Her answer, "For not calling them." His throat tightened. He did not ask who them was. He already knew. In his own room, sleep would not come. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city lights. He had built towers, signed contracts worth millions, outlasted enemies who wanted him broken. Yet he had never felt so unprepared, so powerless, as he did tonight with a little girl in the next room who trusted him more than the world had ever earned. The following morning she gave him an address, scribbled on a napkin with shaky handwriting. She whispered, "Don't let him see you." He did not ask who him was. The dread in her voice told him enough. Hours later, Jacob stood outside a decrepit apartment building, the rain returning in thin sheets. The place reeked of decay, walls stained and cracked, fear woven into every corner. Inside, he found Maria, Ella's mother, collapsed on the floor, battered and bruised almost beyond recognition. For a moment he thought she was gone, but a faint pulse proved otherwise. His voice shook as he called 911, his hand steadying her until the paramedics arrived. When they strapped her to a stretcher, one asked if he was family. His answer came instinctively. "Her daughter is with me." The medic's face softened, then darkened. This was not the first time. Old and new injuries both. She has been invisible too long. Jacob clenched his jaw, rage stirring. Invisible. That was the word. The girl under the street lamp. The woman on the floor. Both unseen, both unprotected. And now, whether he was ready or not, they were part of his life. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, the kind that lingered long after the pot had burned dry. For days, Jacob sat in the corner of Maria's room, his presence steady but silent, while Ella clung to her mother's hand. Maria remained still, caught in a fragile limbo, her breaths measured by machines, her face softened by sedation. Every morning, Jacob brought Ella there, watching as the little girl whispered songs and stories into the quiet, as if her words could coax her mother back to the world. He had never been a man of patience. His entire empire had been built on speed, on closing the deal before anyone else could blink, but with Ella time slowed. He found himself waiting for every flicker of expression, every movement of her small hands, every word she chose to share. The stock reports piling up in his inbox felt irrelevant, meaningless compared to the sound of Ella's humming. For the first time in his life, he was not chasing anything. He was simply there. One morning, sunlight streamed brighter than usual into the hospital room. Jacob was scrolling through an email he did not care about when he noticed it, the faintest twitch of Maria's fingers beneath the blanket. He leaned forward quickly, his voice low but urgent. "Ella." The girl looked up, her eyes wide, just as Maria's lips parted. A sound escaped, fragile but real. Then came a single word. "Ella." The crayon dropped from Ella's hand and she bolted upright. "Mommy." Her small hands cupped Maria's bruised face as tears spilled freely. Maria's eyes fluttered open, confused but undeniably alive. Jacob turned away, his vision blurring, not from fatigue but from a wave of emotion he had locked away for years. When Maria's gaze finally settled on him, she whispered hoarsely, "You stayed." He nodded once, his voice thick. "I told her I would." As Maria regained strength slowly, Jacob found himself woven deeper into both of their lives. Ella began calling him Daddy Jake, the name spilling from her lips without hesitation. The first time she said it, he froze, not knowing how to respond. But when she leaned against him with quiet trust, he realized it was not a title he had to earn through contracts or authority. It was a gift, and one he would never take lightly. At home, the penthouse transformed in ways he never imagined. Duck-shaped slippers appeared beside his polished Italian shoes. Crayon drawings covered the stainless steel fridge. The faint scent of lavender children's shampoo lingered in the air, softening the sharp sterility of marble and glass. What had once been a monument to isolation was now filled with life, with laughter, with tiny footsteps running across floors that used to echo with silence. Even small things changed him. One night, when thunder rumbled low, Ella's hand trembled as she looked out the window. Jacob did not tell her it was nothing, did not dismiss her fear. He simply knelt down, offered his hand, and stayed until the storm passed. Later, when she fell asleep without asking to leave the door open, he realized trust was not something spoken but something lived. Weeks passed, and Maria's recovery remained fragile but hopeful. Jacob bought a small house outside the city, a warm cottage with a porch swing and a garden waiting for laughter. It was not glass and steel, not a fortress of ambition, but a home. He signed the deed with Maria's name alongside his, giving her more than shelter. He was giving them all a chance at a future. Ella bloomed in that new space. She danced barefoot across wooden floors, sang to flowers in the garden, and filled the air with giggles Jacob once thought he would never hear. She called the penguin plush he bought her Margaret and insisted Margaret needed a seat at every meal. She colored pictures of their family, drawing herself, Maria, and Jacob together beneath a shining sun. Sometimes she scribbled words in clumsy crayon, "Forever us." Yet life was not free of shadows. Vincent Greer remained a threat, his influence twisting through politics and law. One morning a package arrived at Jacob's office. Inside it a photograph of Maria unconscious and Ella curled against him. Written in red across the bottom were the words, "She's mine." Rage surged through him, cold and absolute. For years his battles had been fought in boardrooms, victories tallied in numbers. But this was different. This was a line he would never let be crossed. With Detective Nia Carter's help, Jacob pushed harder, gathering evidence, securing guardianship, building a case that would finally expose Greer's violence. Maria, though still frail, signed without hesitation. "He is her home now," she told the judge, her voice unshaken. "And I want her to have more than just me. I want her to have someone who stayed." The ruling granted temporary joint guardianship, and though it was not yet permanent, it felt like the foundation of something unbreakable. Together, they moved into the cottage, not as a perfect family, but as one bound by choice, by survival, by love. Pancakes still burned in the mornings. Laughter still echoed unevenly, but the house was alive. For the first time, so were they. One evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the lawn, Ella sat between them, wearing a flower crown she had made from dandelions. She looked up at Jacob with wide, earnest eyes. "Will it always be like this, or will it go away again?" He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his voice steady. "I cannot promise the world will not change, but I can promise I will not leave." She nodded slowly, then wrapped her arms around his neck. "You are my safest place." Jacob held her close, his heart heavy and light all at once. For a man who once believed success was measured in towers and contracts, he now understood it was found in something far simpler. The warmth of small hands holding his, the quiet trust of a woman healing beside him, the sound of a child calling him Daddy Jake. This was not the life he had planned, but it was the life he could no longer imagine being without. Love does not always arrive the way we expect it. Sometimes it does not come wrapped in comfort or tied with certainty. Sometimes it shows up trembling beneath a street lamp, soaked by rain, carrying nothing but a broken toy and a desperate hope that someone will finally see. For Jacob Thorne, a man who had built his world on ambition and isolation, love came in the form of a little girl named Ella. And once he saw her, he could not unsee her. Their journey was not simple. It was filled with storms, with shadows of fear, with a fight against a system that too often allowed silence to swallow the most vulnerable. Yet in every moment of doubt, Jacob chose to stay. He stayed through the sleepless nights, through the fragile mornings, through the hospital visits where hope flickered as faint as a candle flame. He stayed when walking away would have been easier, when money and power could have given him an excuse to turn his back. He stayed because once you hold a life in your arms, Once you feel the weight of someone who has been unseen for too long, you know that leaving is no longer an option. Ella began to heal, not because the world suddenly became kinder, but because someone refused to let her face it alone. Maria, too, found strength in knowing she was not abandoned, that her daughter's laughter would no longer echo only in memory. Together, they built something fragile yet fierce, a family not defined by blood, but by choice, by courage, by the decision to hold on when everything else demanded letting go. What changed Jacob was not wealth, not power, not recognition. It was the sound of a child's giggle echoing through rooms that once knew only silence. It was being called Daddy Jake by a little girl who trusted him more than anyone else left in her world. It was realizing that true legacy is not carved in glass towers, but in the hearts we choose to protect. And perhaps that is the message for all of us. The world is filled with people who go unseen, children who wait beneath their own flickering lamps, hoping someone will stop. Most of us keep walking, but every now and then someone pauses, someone chooses to stay, and in that choice, everything changes. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the power of love, of hope, of what it means to truly see another human being, then we invite you to be part of our journey. Subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, where every tale reminds us that even in the darkest corners, light can be found and love can rewrite everything.